Good morning, welcome everyone. My name is Surinder Martinetti, Sea Chicago Dancers Community Engagement Consultant. Thank you to, hello, good morning, it's early. Welcome to our final recorded event for our Dance for Camera workshops. This is workshop number 6. I'm so glad that you could join us. Just a few acknowledgements before we get underway. I am a light-skinned, biracial, Southeast Asian and European woman. My hair is short and purple. I'm sitting in my home office with large windows behind me, and it's kind of a gloomy day. I'd also like to recognize that my home sits on the traditional lands of the Council of the People of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and the Ottawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. I would also like to acknowledge the following statements. We work in different communities with different resources. We have different sorts of practice and aesthetics and politics. We use different language based on our own communities and situations, but we believe everyone here intends to be respectful. For this session, we seek to create an environment where people can speak freely without feeling worried that they will inadvertently offend someone else by the way they speak. We come together to share, reflect, question, and learn. Also, just making sure that everyone knows this is being recorded for later distribution. And for anyone who is watching the recording, there is also all of the other workshops recorded that you can go back and view, and you can participate and join the community through our Discord channel. All right, well, this morning we have got a lot to cover, so I'm going to hand it over to Enki.
Hey, everyone. Thank you all for attending. It is great to see your faces. So today we're going to be talking about, well, the theme is wheels down. And so, as you know, the course is about movement and harmony. So we're going to be talking about camera motion finally in a number of ways. So we'll be talking about tilt and pan, rotations, also like just dollys thing, which is just anything on a cart, wheels, chairs, shopping carts, sliders, ways you can move around smoothly on set, and maybe like ladders, etc. We'll also be talking about how to move steadily, because steady motion, there's good reasons to use it sometimes. And then we're also going to be talking hopefully about camera operation as a character, and thinking of the camera as a character. And consequently, if you have a character in the scene, then you have a relationship between the character and what is being seen and the subjects. And then hopefully we will have a mini project. And then lastly, we should also prepare a little bit for the course that's coming up, where we'll actually be on site. So just thinking about a couple of things there, like what's the layout like, what's who's going to be moving, and what should be the colors, what should the colors be. So that's what I plan to cover today. I think Surinder is off currently. So I'm going to introduce Jenny, who will be talking, I think, about perhaps compositions, but I'll let her speak to that.
Thank you so much. That is correct. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all again. So I know we have some photography folk in the Zoom room and potentially in the later recorded workshop. So I'm going to talk a little bit, pulling kind of from a photography point of view about composition. I think it's easy to forget or overlook composition in film, maybe because the camera is moving, and it's, I mean, sometimes you are doing static shots, but it might feel like it's less about setting up the shot and more about what's happening on the other side. But I want to encourage you to not think that way, and to think about how important it is to set up your shot and composition. So we're going to go into a little lecture, and I pulled some still images from my film that I showed couple weeks ago now, to kind of demonstrate these elements that I'm speaking about. So here we go. All right, so talking about compositional elements to consider when you're framing your shot. And again, these still images that I've used to demonstrate this are coming from my film Hold Still. So I just like this quote. I don't know if you're familiar with Lois Greenfield's work. She's a incredible dance photographer, but I thought this was interesting. You don't have to know what you're doing before you start. Inspiration can come at any time. And we've talked about this a little bit as far as inspiration for films. And I think that you also don't have to have this huge mind-blowing moment of inspiration or idea or concept before you start something, that sometimes the inspiration can also come while you're creating. So be open to that. All right, the rule of thirds. So if you can imagine that your image is divided into 9 equal segments by 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines, the rule of thirds says you should position the most important elements in your scene along these lines or close to the points where they intersect. Doing so will add balance and interest to your shot. You'll see this a lot of times, and particularly when you're watching a documentary or some interview. So this idea that you have these 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines, it's just, I find it to be a little bit more interesting rather than just always putting the subject center. And like it mentioned before, you can have a little bit more of the option for balancing in this film or in this composition. So here we have our subjects over here, close to the point of intersection from those 2, from that horizontal and vertical line. Horizontal, I think, is what I just said. Take it if you want. Balancing elements. So placing your main subjects off center, as with the rule of thirds, creates a more interesting shot, but it can leave a void in the scene, which can make it feel empty. You should balance the weight of your subject by including another object of lesser importance to fill the space. So if you look back here, where we are over here in this kind of third of the image, we also have the rise of the stairs and this little metal structure over here. So it's not a completely void blank space. There is still subject over in that other, on the other side to balance it out, though it's less eye-catching than Lead Dancers in bright orange. So here's another example of this balancing. Here we are again over more like on the rule of thirds, and we have this big open window over here, which is literally could be spacious and void, but through it we can see the Golden Gate Bridge on the other side. So it's obviously much bigger than we are, but off in the distance and through the fog, it's muted. So it's still maybe it's catching your eye a bit, and also this kind of wood right here. So just having something to kind of balance and offset that's a little less attention grabbing. Excuse me, leading lines, but I like to think of this in film as leading movement. When we look at a still image, our eye is naturally drawn along lines. By thinking about how you place your lines in composition, you can affect the way we view the image, pulling us into the picture, towards the subject, or on a journey through the scene. There's many different types of lines: straight, diagonal, curvy, zigzag, radial, etc., and each can be used to enhance your composition. If you think of a lot of paintings, oh, that's a lovely image right there. Who is that? I'm not sure who that is. Somebody put an image up on their Zoom box, but those lines on that star are directing us to, I don't know if everyone can see this or not, but that person's image, the lines of the star are directing us to those circles on the ends. But in paintings you might see, or in photos you might see, Lois actually does a lot of this where her dancers will have like flowing fabric that they're jumping with. And it's a really eye-catching image, and the line of that fabric or the line of the dancers, our eye is naturally drawn to those. And a lot of times, particularly in still life artists, they would set things up specifically and intentionally so that the angle of the light, or so that the angle, the starkness of whatever is in that image is intentionally drawing your line to the main subject that they want you to see. So there is a lot of direction in, even in still life paintings, whether we realize it or not, the eye is naturally drawn to those lines and to follow the subjects. So when it comes to film, I feel that this can be done by allowing movement from one clip to direct us into movement of the next clip. And there can be a bit of a camera reveal for what's to follow. So in this scene, I have this on a PowerPoint where I can click these and they play, but we're looking at a PDF. So this scene, if you remember seeing this film, I'm up on top of this, this second level of this building doing movement. And as my movement kind of transitions down through my hands, the camera pans down and Lauren, my dance partner, is revealed underneath. So that's an element where there's movement that's leading us to this reveal through the footage. This scene over here at the bottom right is less about the camera movement revealing, and that one is Lauren exits off of the frame. I do a movement where I'm turning myself around, and the next scene that we come into is connected by that similar movement. I believe Lauren's the one that's doing it. So a way to kind of continue the story through the movement, either with the camera or movement of the subjects in the scene. Symmetry and patterns. We are surrounded by symmetry and patterns, both natural and man-made. They can make for very eye-catching compositions, particularly in situations where they are not expected. Another great way to use them is to break the symmetry or pattern in some way, introducing tension and a focal point to the scene. So here we have a little bit of like symmetry, even though Lauren's elbow's bent, but having the one up, one down, head up, head down, kind of creating this element of tension between those 2 points. And then over here, similar kind of to the balancing subjects and or rule of thirds, the symmetry of the movement that we're doing. And actually there's kind of a lot in this one. There's also a little bit of leading lines through the architecture, moving through to the ocean beside us, but having some kind of balance and pattern happening there. Viewpoints. Before filming your subject, take time to think about where you'll shoot it from. Our viewpoint has a massive impact on the composition of our shots, and as a result, it can greatly affect the message that the shot conveys. Rather than just shooting from eye level, consider filming from high above, down at ground level, from the side, the back, a long way away, very close up, and so on. I think, I'm trying to think if this was one of the films I showed, but you know, having, or the film You that I showed, when we have those shots where it was an extreme close-up, we're seeing lines on the face, we're seeing lines in the fingers, anything like that, that is a very different, we as an audience have a very different relationship to what we're seeing, as opposed to if it's a very wide shot pulled far back and that person or that subject is really isolated. Similarly, if we have an aerial shot from above, more of a bird's eye view, that's also going to give us a different feel than if we're on the ground or having a profile view or something like that. So, you know, even here, it's a bit disorienting, or there's maybe a little bit of chaos or just confusion or intrigue when you're coming from an angle maybe that you wouldn't normally be able to view something from, right? Like in order for us to get this view right here, someone would have to go over and lie down kind of below us, and that's a little awkward, and we might wonder why that person is down there. But through film, we can go there. So that's one way to do that. And here, kind of like what I was just talking before, if we're just looking at these two holding one another from far away, we get a certain feeling, we maybe have certain ideas about the scene, versus when we're up close, there's a lot, there's different emotion behind it. I think for me as a viewer, I'm pulled into that scene more, I'm more invested. It's just more intimate. So there's more to be revealed and more questions that I as a viewer might have. Background. The human eye is excellent at distinguishing between different elements in a scene, whereas a camera has a tendency to flatten the foreground and background, and this can often ruin an otherwise great shot. Thankfully, this problem is usually easy to overcome at the time of shooting. Look around for a plain and unobtrusive background and compose your shot so it doesn't distract or detract from the subject. So two different kind of versions, one of obtrusive and one of unobtrusive. Here, even though we are close up, the background has graffiti, has different colors, the lighting's a little bit obtrusive. So that image, even though we can see it pretty clearly, it's louder. There's more going on. The eye is maybe looking at different things versus an unobtrusive background over here, same position, but because it's against the light open vacant space of the ocean and sky behind, there's less to distract from. This is probably mostly going to be where the eye is drawn. And those both, I don't think one is right or wrong. It's just kind of just determining which the scene calls for. Depth. Because most cinematography is a two-dimensional medium, we have to choose our composition carefully to convey the scene of depth that was present in the actual scene. Maybe you've experienced this before. I hate this when there's like an incredible, like the moon is huge and close and it just feels so powerful, and I go to take a photo of it and it's like a blip light, and I'm like, well, that's pointless. We can't get that really true essence of what we're seeing most of the time through film versus what the natural eye can see. But you can create depth in a composition by including objects in the foreground, middle ground, and background. Another useful composition technique is overlapping, where you deliberately partially obscure one object with another. The human eye naturally recognizes these layers and mentally separates them out, creating a shot with more depth. So that is something also that I really encourage you, whether you're using a DSLR or hopefully you're using that like Filmic Pro, or now the new iPhones are doing this automatically, but playing with depth, playing with your focus can add so much interesting texture, I feel, to your film. So, I mean, I love filming things out of focus. I love tracking where you're moving from one subject in the foreground to the background or vice versa. So here we're looking at foreground. Here, Lauren is in focus, closer to the camera lens, whereas I am farther away and out of focus. So that would be focusing on the foreground. Here, this shot over here to the right is more of a middle ground where we're both kind of equidistant from each other and the camera, and both of us are pretty much in focus. So that's more of middle ground. And then background here, this same shot as the first, but flipped. So now Lauren in the foreground is out of focus and me in the background, I'm in focus. So it just kind of gives it gives more depth and texture to the piece. And playing between the two is also a way to kind of reveal subjects or further movement in the scene. Framing. The world is full of objects which make perfect natural frames, such as trees, archways, and holes. By placing these around the edges of the composition, you help to isolate the main subject from the outside world. The result is a more focused image, which draws your eye naturally to the main point of interest. If you remember, I think maybe the first workshop I taught, the little mini project that we did, I filmed through a coffee cup. So the handle of the coffee cup provided us its own little frame through which you could see the movement through. But we have these things all around us in nature. So these are less natural, but they're out in nature. These actual framings that were happening in the bunker where we were shooting. Again, this is actually from that scene where I started on top and then the movement of the camera revealed Lauren below, but that provided a nice frame there, as well as this little individual structure that had its own kind of window frames through. So I encourage you to both create your own frames as well as use what nature provides for us. Cropping. Often a shot will lack impact because the main subject is so small it becomes lost among the clutter of its surroundings. By cropping tight around the subject, you eliminate the background noise, ensuring the subject gets the viewer's undivided attention. I love cropping and I love extreme close-up. I think it's so interesting. There's elements of unknown and things that can be revealed. And I think you're kind of allowing the audience member to take a little bit of their own, take their imagination through the scene. I would love for us to get out of the frame of mind that we have to show the whole body because we are dancers, because we are filming dance. Everyone needs to see all the movement. I think that is something I would love for us to get away from, because we have this awesome magical element of film and cameras, and we're able to really intentionally direct what the viewer is seeing, more so than if we're choreographing something for a large stage. I say we run with that and play around with cropping and tighter shots. So here we have cropping, very close, obstructing parts of the body. And also, we don't look at these parts of the body that often. We are so much more focused on face or full body versus individually looking at these body parts. So I think this is a great thing to play with. And finally, experimentation. Experiment, experiment, experiment. With the accessibility and immediacy of digital cameras and smartphones, we can film a ton of footage and delete the unwanted stuff later at absolutely no extra cost. Remember when you used to have to drop your film off? Take advantage of this fact and experiment with your composition. You never know whether an idea will work until you try it. I encourage a lot of my students, once like maybe they come from a background of dance and haven't done much with film or cameras, and I just encourage them, as you're walking around, like, and you're noticing, I mean, this happens to us all the time. We might not be thinking of it in this way, but you'll be walking down the street and be like, oh, that's a really interesting window. Or, oh, that, like, the way the light is hitting that part of the sidewalk is really cool. Pull out your phone and play around with framing things or with moving the camera to reveal these things that you're seeing. And I just think that you can take a really interesting movement phrase or piece of choreography and add even more to it by the angles and viewpoints and way that you compose how the camera interacts with the dance. So I encourage you to play around with that. That is my lecture on composition. I also had, I'm not sure how or what Enki's doing, but I'm happy to continue and show a short film. This one definitely has elements of composition, but I was also wanting to show this one in terms of kind of the harmony and movement of camera. So let me find it. Is that good, Enki? Cool. Here we go. This is a film. I'm going to put the link in the chat and then I'll share my screen. This is a film from Jacob Jonas, the company, who's based out here in Los Angeles. And they collaborated with Ill Abilities, a dance group that represents a differently abled dance community. And I just found there to be a lot of, I just found the camera to really take on a persona or take on a shared, yeah, it's like another dancer. What I like about that film is particularly the opening. The first time I saw it, you know, they're with the use of cropping and the way they're filming with the dancers moving toward us, you might have no idea that they have any kind of physical disability limiting factors. So there's stuff yet to be revealed. And then once they start the film, I really appreciate that there's a lot of movement down on the floor. It's a lot closer, it's more intimate. And there's some nice kind of like camera reveals, also panning across as one dancer moves and then is obstructed by part of the architecture. And then the next scene we see, we're into another dancer. So I like this film as a way to show that the camera can have there can be more intention behind the camera and the way it is filmed and the way your shots are set up. and also kind of provide more of an intimate connection with the subjects through the way the filming is done. And there you have it.
Can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
In terms of filming, do you think they filmed it and then just slowed it down in the post-processing? Or did they do, like in the actual filming, did they do, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's like continuous shooting at stills, but they're like, you can program it every second or something?
I'm wondering how it came through on your side, because did it seem like it was slower motion?
It seemed like it was sort of like slow freeze frame.
I think it's just the lag of Zoom.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll watch it on a link, the link.
Yeah,
later.
I mean, there's moments where they are, holding those stalls and balancing in ways that I have no idea how they're doing it. But I think that it was filmed at pretty much a regular frame rate. That does bring up, I'm going to see, depending on how much time we have, there's another film that illustrates something along the lines that you're talking about. And if I have a moment to show a part of it, I will. But there's ways to have multiple subjects in one scene where one is moving at a certain pace and the others are moving at a different pace. And then by speeding up or slowing down in post, you can create like a really interesting juxtaposition of speed. So if I can find that film, I'll show just a short clip of it. But I think this one was just the lag on your end. So I do encourage you to watch it, because I think it won't feel that way. But I wonder how that felt for you on that side.
It was cool.
Nice.
Gazoon tight surrender. Yeah, I just checked the film on YouTube directly, and it's actually smooth. It doesn't have a stop motion effect or a slow frame rate when you look at it on YouTube. Although, just so you know, if you do shoot something at regular 23.976 frames per second, you can always slow it down in post. But if you shoot it at like 1 frame a second, it's very hard to speed up without getting a lot of like blurring effects with the optical flow. Jenny, was there anything more you wanted to talk about there?
I think that's it for now. I might have things to chime in once you kind of get going. And again, I'm going to look for that other film, and it would be just like a minute to show you a clip if I can with the juxtaposition of the speed, but that's what I got for right now.
All right. Well, I put in the link in the Discord channel. There's a link to camera moves. If anybody wants to look at that, just to kind of get a sense of different types of camera moves. So look there. And I really liked, the examples that you showed in your work itself, Jenny, and also how the juxtaposition worked out. And as you were saying, with like leading lines, and I was the miscreant who was posting that image of the triangles. That was me. I was trying to allude to something called a continuation of line.
Do you have that up? Can you show it right now? Because I didn't see it. I think we are.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, that was good.
Yeah. So let me navigate to this real quick. So this is something called a continuation of line. And so, one could ask, how many circles are there? Anyone? 3. Okay, how many triangles are there? Anyone?
A lot.
2 triangles.
Well,
7 triangles. Okay, and then so let's perhaps agree that a circle is something that has a radius and a circumference, and it's one continuous line. That would imply that there are no circles on the screen. And also, we might say that a triangle has 3 sides. And in this case, nothing has 3 sides. Although maybe the outer image has 4 sides. So we create these continuations neurologically, which perhaps evolutionarily is really advantageous when you are trying to see a form behind a kind of camouflage, right? Your brain needs to imagine a continuity in order to create a form. So neurologically, we have this capacity, and we create these forms in our minds, and we say, oh, the white triangle is covering up the black triangle, and it's covering up the black circles, when in fact, they're not actually there, but we just project onto it. So filmmakers and photography and everybody, we use that, but we're harnessing the neuroscience of our minds all the time in order to see anything. I don't know if any of you are familiar with like the anxiety that children have when their parents, when they're first born, and the parents walk out of the room and basically they cease to exist, right? You don't know that things continue to exist after you see them, but we just learn to assume that things continue to exist. So there's a lot of neurological stuff that goes on with that. So that's a slight digression. So what I wanted to talk about, how did I switch to, oops. Let me switch my system back here to this, and that's not what I wanted. I guess I'm in a feedback loop there. Don't do that. Let's go with that. Is this working? Yes. Okay, great. So I wanted to get to harmony because we're so close to shooting in real life, real people, in a real situation. So I'm very excited about that. So what do we think? What do you think about the idea of movement and harmony with camera? Does anybody have a value for that? Do they think it's a waste of time? Do they think like you could do it, doesn't matter? What are your thoughts on camera and harmony?
I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. To press things along. So we have a lot of different harmonies, right? There's music harmony, which is probably what we're most used to. And where did I? So we have a definition, right, of harmony, which is that. Let me just pull it up. The combination of simultaneous sounded musical notes to produce chords or chord progressions having a pleasing effect. I don't know that there's anything there that is not completely subjective, right? So harmony is subjective. The idea of this, also the second definition is quality of forming or pleasing and, the quality of forming a pleasing and consistent whole. And then another thing, go ahead.
Can you say that again? I just did.
The quality of forming a pleasing and consistent whole. Right, a kind of completeness, which I think we encounter when we sometimes see a dance or a performance, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they actually make sense, and it's not just an interruption where the show is over and you're not sure exactly was it supposed to be over, was it not over, there's an interruption, but a sense of completeness. So that's just something I wanted to keep in the back of our minds about harmony. And when you're moving the camera or you're filming, are you thinking about the whole thing or just the moment? Because it's very easy to get caught up in like, I want to get this shot and then I have to get this shot, but really you don't wrap it all up until the very end and then you edit it. So thinking about that whole arc. So now, but to talk about harmony a little bit, I think we're going to have to digress a bit into. I'm going to harken back a little bit to composition, right? So composition has all these elements that Jenny was mentioning. There's perspective, there's continuation of line, there's contrast, there's focus and texture. Let me see if I can pull up some examples here while I'm speaking. I'll just go through. I pick this one and we go here. Why is it so contrasting? Selection A, 1 second. Okay, right. So we've got foreground, continuation of line, contrast, focus and texture. Here's an example of that, which has focus and texture. There's blocking and framing, where you frame something and you identify the subject because of the frame around it. You have things that can separate the foreground from background, right? Where color is being used here to separate out the multiple subjects, and also scale and size. You have your basic just triangle concepts of, this is like from painting, where a lot of painting compositions are structured around triangle forms. And triangles are a kind of a natural byproduct of perspective, where when you have a deep perspective or something, you have a triangle that forms. Here's another example of foreground and background. I'll stick with this for a moment. So we have triangles, which are common. You have these other aspects of triangles, diagonals. Uh-oh. Somebody talking in the background.
Can we just mute that person?
So back to triangles, there's another thing there. Then you have your basic structure of triangles, and they can come up in many different ways. Then you have, we said triangles. We mentioned color already. You can also just have tone here of this kind of color, where there's like the predominant color within the painting. And also, as I was, we talked before a little bit about one down, two across, where the background is darker than the foreground subjects, and you have shading, which is happening across this. So, a lot of cinematography and photography is influenced by painting, because painting's been around for such a long time and people really knew how to separate out things. And then we also just have negative space, which can be used to give a form to something, something to think about as well. And then there's, scale, etc. And juxtaposition is used all the time. But when you put all these things together, when you put these foreground elements, background elements, tone together, you can end up with, in the fullness of it, you can come down with irony, right? Which is a assemblage of the kind of compositional elements that you're having. Now, I don't know why I don't see more irony in dance, and I don't know why that's not the case. So that was just a quick refresher or further examples of that. But I wanted to emphasize the significance of color in so many of these forms, where people use color to create composition, which I think most dancers know when they're dealing with the lighting of the stage production. But you do have a lot of control over that if you pick your location well. But now I'm going to start talking a bit. Well, did anybody have any questions about those composition ideas? I think a lot of you have photography experience, so this might be well known. Was there any questions in that area? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about panning and tilting. So I'm gonna make it simple here, right? So here's your basic camera setup, and this is your tilt. I'm just tilting the camera forward and back, and then pan is rotating from a single point of origin, like a center point. The camera is not moving horizontally; it's just rotating in a plane. So that's pan and tilt. And if you don't tighten your things well, you'll get a pan accidentally. So there's panning and tilting. And one thing you have to be concerned with, as I mentioned before, is that if you've got your camera and you do a quick horizontal pan, you might get this like wobbly effect, which is called the Jello effect or rolling shutter. And that's a consequence of the way the image is recorded on your camera. If it goes top down, then by the time it gets to the bottom edge here, this section has moved a little bit already by the time the camera has scanned down to here. So you'll get a kind of a curvy thing if you do a fast pan. But a lot of cameras now have kind of corrections for that. So I'm seeing that less and less. So I wanted to ask people, what's the best camera motion you have seen in, or any film where you've noted the camera motion, if you can think of any, and what made it great?
Like in any show or movie?
Yep.
If it's on Netflix, it's spooky season if you care to watch. It's called The Haunting of Hill House. I think it's based on a book. I don't know. I didn't read it. Episode 5, I believe. It opens, and the whole episode, I'm pretty sure, at least the first like 25 minutes, is one continuous shot for 25 straight minutes. And there's a lot of conflict. So like the camera's moving like this way and characters will come from behind it. And then they like swirl in chaos, kind of like conflict happens, and then they'll follow them, and then they'll exit as like someone else is coming from like a different way. It's insane. It's like one of the best things I've ever seen. Recommend it for sure.
Please write that in and put a link in for everybody and put it in Discord. And just, yeah, if you can find it on YouTube or something like that, or just the title or something like that, that'd be interesting to review.
One that I remember, but because I really hated it, was it was a movie from a while ago, also scary movie, The Blair Witch Project. I couldn't watch the movie. I don't actually like scary movies, but my husband made me go see it. And because it's like a handheld camera, so there was all of this camera shake, which I think for the movie really worked, but for me was just vomit inducing. but I think that was what, they were really going for, that sort of like visceral feeling of like really shaky movement, really following. So like the camera is the person behind it, who I don't think you ever really see their face. So I thought it was effective for what we're talking about, but terrible because, yeah, it made me not want to watch the movie.
Well, I think that's an interesting way to lead into this idea of a sympathetic camera motion. So if you wanted, imagine you have a shot, static shot, filming straight down, and you have some performer, let's say on a parking lot, because parking lots are just so popular. Rooftop parking lot. Camera's right overhead. You're looking straight down, and that camera is just looking at them, and they're staying within the region of the camera. Camera doesn't move at all. What do you feel would be the connection between the camera sympathetically and the dancer? Are they connected? If you have a top-down God view, static, and you have somebody on the sidewalk or wherever.
Well, it might depend if the person's looking up at them, where the line of sight is, could create a connection, but maybe inherently they're less likely that there's a connection?
I mean, it's more of a voyeuristic connection where where us as the viewer looking down, we're connected to them because we're, voyeuristically looking at them, and the subjects don't see us or aren't connected to us. So we want to have a connection with them, but they don't have a connection with us. So it's a one-way.
Right. And a lot of films, they will portray power. And this is not dance, but within a lot of film theory, you'll have a dominant character and you'll have this submissive kind of person who's got less power. And that they will literally, if you want to appear that you're in power, then you're kind of looking up at the camera. And then if you want to switch things, then you're looking down at the camera. So where the camera is relative to the subject is a way of expressing power, right? Something that's over you versus something that's under you, and your relationship to the subject. So that's one thing to play with, right? These are no hard and fast rules. And interestingly, in film, it actually has a lot of you're talking about relationships with people are talking, etc. But in dance, we have a lot more flexibility, right? The camera can move anywhere. And it doesn't have to be this is a power dynamic. But it is something worth considering if you wish to use camera position as a demonstration of power. So that's just something to keep in mind. What is the power that the worm's eye view has when you are looking down on a perspective versus you are looking up? It doesn't have to be symbolic, but you have that potential. So it's just something to think about.
I think dances we often use, the stage direction and placement on the stage that is our power dynamic, and how we change where dancers are on stage and where they are in relation to each other on the stage is how we change the power dynamic. So then if we're thinking of the camera as another person on the stage and where that person is, we'll change the power dynamic with the dancers and the camera or between the dancers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to show a little clip here. And I want you to tell me, what does it make you feel about your relationship to who you're seeing? And let me see if I can pull this up. Pause that. And yeah, so it's looping again, so we're going to watch it one more time. Okay. So, what perspective was that were those shots shot from?
They seem to be almost all of them, not all, but pretty much at human level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're almost all shot at eye level. And it's kind of introducing you to a scene, right, or a culture. So
yeah, it felt intimate and relaxed. So that person was invited into the community. Apart from the shot that was underneath in the water, I felt like that was a different one where that was slightly more voyeuristic, whereas all of the others were you are a person with them in their community. And that was the one shot where I'm it's a nice shot, but it doesn't feel like that was a person.
Yeah.
The second time around, I felt, that underwater shot was the first one. I was like, But like within, like you felt within the whole shot, you know. And so and then seeing the content, I thought, oh, are we supposed to be like the spirit or something, right? But then we were part of, I don't know, more and more because they were chasing, like when people were running away. So, oh, maybe we're different animals or something. And we're seeing it from those perspectives.
Yeah. I think that a lot of film, I'm going to talk while this is playing. I'm going to loop it again. I think a lot of film, they shoot from a perspective that when they want you to feel like you are with the people and you're a member of the group, that you are at the eye level. And when you're at eye level, then you're with the scene and you are equal to the people that you're engaged with. Also pay attention to the camera angle. I'm sorry, the field of view. How wide is it? And how does that immerse you in the space? Right, so if you're in, let me back up here for a second. So if we're in this perspective, we're in the plane of the person. And I think part of the projection is that if we can see them, they might be able to see us. And we are in parity with them. So this, I think, creates a more sympathetic kind of relationship with the subject versus something which, as you were saying before, if we're down beneath here, then we're more voyeuristic. So we're not the same, but maybe we're a fish or something like that underneath.
If you call the view from above the God view, what do you call from beneath?
Yeah, in film and photography, the bird's eye view, worm's eye view, that's the terminology. But now maybe people will be thinking the drone's eye view. But it's interesting. We still call it an eye. So we have that kind of sympathy going on there. Now, in some of these other shots, I guess I want to look at a little bit of how the camera is moving. So how does the camera move through the scene?
It's like interactive, like you're moving with the subject in the way that they're moving.
And is it handheld or is it steady cam? What are you seeing?
I mean,
Well, it's steady. Yeah.
And then there's the one where it sort of like comes down, which I think would be like one of those boom things.
It might be handheld on a gimbal or something. I mean, it's not unsteady, but it's not sitting on a tripod.
Okay. All right. So now, good observations. I'm going to show you another clip now, and I want you to tell me what kind of motion you notice. How does it affect you? What's the perspective, and why was it chosen? So let me go here, and it's going to come in a second. No, this one. All right. Do we want to see it again, or is that good? Again? Okay. This time I'm going to do it with sound. The first film that we saw a second ago, before that, that was The New World by Terrence Malick. This is from Requiem for a Dream by Darren Aronofsky. Any thoughts on how that camera motion was interpreted by you?
The first, when you see his face, it's almost like, because you can't see his arms or his hands, it's like he's holding the camera like this. But then when it switches, so it's like you're seeing out of his eyes, it's like they strapped a GoPro to his forehead and told him to run.
Yeah. Yeah. So in contrast to like the motion that we saw in the first film, The New World, this one, they actually had an entire apparatus, which is like mounted to his waist. And then that camera is basically like a selfie cam. And that they had mounted it to him so that if he moved, the camera moved. And that was, he was locked into that. So if he shook, the camera shook. Versus the other film, which we're moving through the space, but it's a little bit more modified. We don't really know who's doing the viewing, but it's not as shaky as this other film. And as you all probably know, if you go walking with your camera in your hand, you're going to get this kind of like bobbing motion, which is very visceral, etc. Interestingly, when you walk down the street, it's kind of like you have a head-mounted camera with your own eyes, but for some reason, neurologically again, your eyes smooth things out, right? Your eyes and your brain actually smooth out the motion so that the whole world doesn't seem like this shaky mess when you are walking down the street or running, right? We have a internal kind of stabilization that's happening cognitively. So film attempts to emulate that with certain technologies like Steadicams, like gimbals, etc., to smooth out that motion, to make it a little bit closer to how we normally perceive the world. So that's like one of the technologies, that is kind of being used to give us the perspective and sympathy for the subject, right? And just as motion gives us a kind of like human perspective, that could be very human, or it can be just like moderately human perspective. And then there's also just, that's the camera movement relative to the background. And then there's the perspective where you are seeing the subject from, whether it's from low, from high, etc. So I just wanted people to be kind of like aware of that, of how your camera shake and how your camera smoothness gives you a more visceral effect, or a more like, I'm watching this as a following along versus I'm really with this person viscerally. And to what Surinder was saying, the Blair Witch Project, that is shot, unsteady, and you are in this person's perspective. And that shakiness also, while making you nauseous, like as she said, which I think is a real thing, nausea, interestingly, is a visceral reaction. And as a filmmaker, do you want your audience to have visceral reactions to your work? I guess that's an open question.
Maybe not kind of the visceral upchuck reaction, but
Yeah, not the nauseating visceral.
Right. Not the nausea. Maybe not.
Like to get that sense of disorientation. You don't need to use it as much as they did to give that sense of disorientation. So yeah, I mean, it can be used to affect what you want your audience to see or feel.
Yeah. So yeah, I think visceral has degrees. And it doesn't have to, there's like the inner ear reaction, which can cause nausea. But there's you can also have like a visceral reaction, which is like empathetic, where you just feel viscerally so sad, so upset, so distraught with someone. And so it's an art to kind of tap into these emotional responses. But filmmaking can also use these associations you have between your inner ear and your eyes to give you a physiological response. And that is something to think about. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit here. So I wanted to emphasize here that these kind of motions, whether it's a gimbal or a tripod, they are in some ways, particularly at the eye level, right? If you're shooting at the eye level, then you are probably getting people to feel like they are moving like a human, that they're in the human context. The human context is at eye level. We even have words like, equality, and we usually think of equality as at the same level. So eye level is a kind of manifestation of equality, in some forms.
Is now a good time that we can take a little break, since we're about 10 after? So it'd be nice to take, 10 minutes or so to stretch our legs, get more coffee, get some water.
That's fine with me.
Good. All right, we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. So
all right. I think most of us are back. So I'm gonna hop back a smidge there, right? We talked about tilt, pan. Tracking is just when you are following somebody. So they use that in one of the scenes with in the film, where was it? No, I've lost the name of the film. Oh, well, in one of the films I showed you, they were following a person going through like some trees and stuff like that. So that would be a tracking shot when you're following something. A dolly is actually anything in the horizontal plane. So people say dolly, and typically they used to be mounted on rails, but a dolly is anything that's in the horizontal plane. And I think for dance, there's a lot of ways to move. You've got a lot of freedom. It doesn't have to have all the restrictions, and it also probably doesn't have all the cumbersomeness that films have, where you end up with something like a Scorsese setup where you have massive amounts of equipment, and we don't have to really think too much about that. But what I wanted people to think about is, what is it that's going to make movement feel human? And what is going to make movement feel human, and what's going to make movement of the camera not feel human?
So with what we were talking about earlier with the human at eye level, kind of moving with us, like close to your subjects or near to your subject, so it feels like you're included.
Yeah. So inclusion also is affected by the level that you're shooting the film at, and then also the lens that you're using. So like right now we have, in just fortunately the camera sensor there on the webcam, it's got a pretty wide perspective, right? It might be something equivalent to like a 35 millimeter perspective, possibly even like a 28 millimeter. And you can see these leading lines that are like forming along the side here. right? Which is going up this way. It's kind of like pointing towards me. So whenever you see a lens that has something converging into the center relatively steeply, that's generally a wider lens. And our eyes are, some would say, around 40 millimeter single eye perspective. Your angle of a single eye, what angle that is around a 44 millimeter, 40 to 44, which is kind of like if you use a lens that is in this human perspective, then that's kind of the human perspective. So if you want something to feel kind of human, then you might be like, I want it to be a wider lens. Painters have used this for a long time. And to go back to this scene over here, let me switch this to background. Okay, so back to this shot. This is a kind of a human perspective, human level, and with a wider angle view. Similar to this one. This might actually be telephoto, so maybe that's not such a great idea. This one has a wider view, and you're kind of immersed in the scene. The wider something is, the more immersed you are in it. That tends to be the consequence of having a wider lens, the immersion that you are. So the lens that you choose affects how human the shot feels, right? And then the level that you choose also determines the humanity of it. And also the way, the steadiness with which the camera moves is also I guess communicates the humanity of it or the alienation of it. If you have a very mechanical kind of motion, then you're going to be like, I'm on a robot, or I'm not a human, I'm a bug, I'm flying through some sort of space. So how your camera moves, where your camera is, and the lens that you're at. Those are at least three things that give it kind of a human thing. So anytime you start varying from that, or you start narrowing your field of view, right? Or you start getting crazy wide, right? You start getting a 9 millimeter angle view, then you're almost getting away from like a human perspective. If you start moving through space in an inhuman way, then you're going to be like, okay, I'm not a human, I'm something else. Anyway, that's just something to think about in your film. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, actually, let's, I'm going to show one other film here. And I want you guys to think about what is the perspective? How is it moving? Why is it moving that way? And what does the movement tell you about the relationship between the camera and the subject? So let me put this up. Did I lose? Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I've lost my reference film. There it is. Sorry. Oh, okay. So, all right. Now I'm sorry, the sound might not be great, and you might have seen the film. This is from Pina. So think about how does the camera motion? What does the camera motion tell you? So how did the camera move?
Well, it moved with enough to keep the dancer sort of like in center frame the whole time. So it was very, I felt steady.
Yeah.
At first, I thought it was following her, like it seemed to be centering, but then when she turned away and then it didn't work.
Uh-huh. Anything else, Claire? Notice anything?
Yeah, it was just like tracking on a horizontal plane.
Okay. Okay. So I want you to, I'm going to play it again. I'm going to talk during this. So see at which she's staying relative to frame, she's staying kind of a little bit right there, right? And when she's moving, the camera's moving. When does the camera stop? Camera has stopped.
When she stops.
Yeah. Now she's moving. Is the camera moving? Camera's moving again. Now we're tracking, following her, keeping her, as Surendra said, in kind of one location. She has stopped going this way. Camera's still moving and now stopped. But so it moved a little bit after she moved. She's going backwards now. It's moving a little bit backwards. So it's a very subtle effect that the filmmaker is exhibiting here. But in this section, the camera is tied to her, mostly. Which is a technique that a fair number of filmmakers use. But how does that affect your relationship to what you're seeing?
I feel like it adds stake, like I am like invested or connected somehow to the woman.
Mm-hmm. So when we're moving, when the woman moves, we're connected, like you said, to the woman. So we're going to have that perhaps empathy, or at least we're kind of bonded to her. And she's moving in a very kind of vulnerable way, right? She's being caught by this other character. And so where she goes, we go, right? And then we can see like, oh, she's in this precarious thing. She's tipping over. And we have established the camera motion to be like, we want you to bond with her. You're not bonding with him, right? And we're not just fixing the camera someplace and saying like, oh, these people are moving within that. We are connected to her and we share her vulnerability. Now also take a look at, this is just a fundamental aspect of tension, right? So when I'm gonna pick a moment. Oh, I gotta pick there, right? This is within the scape, and actually I think I can find a better section. Is there a better section? Yeah. Here. Right? Think about, look at the layout of the aspect ratio, right? So what is the aspect ratio of this film? And what do I mean by aspect ratio?
It's not as wide as some films.
Mhm.
Doesn't seem like it. I don't know what it is though.
Well, we don't have to say precisely, but in broad terms, it's definitely landscape,
Oh yeah.
right? It's definitely landscape. It might be something like 2.35 or something like that. And when you have a figure that is in this position, right? This is kind of like a form of tension between what we think of as stable, which is horizontal, right? Versus something that's vertical. We know, or we in our minds have a sense that somebody that is upright has a kind of stability, even if they are relative to the background shorter and they could tip over. But this is a more stable position, right, than this, right? Because in our minds, we already have a sense of gravity. So this is tension that's occurring geometrically from the aspect ratio of the film, because it's landscape, and also the two subjects. Now, what is the, we're just going to guess here because we don't really know, but what lens do you think people were using here?
Not super wide, not zoomed in either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not crazy wide, but it's not also not crazy zoomed in. So it's probably something maybe 20, maybe 35, but not 70. So let's say it's something between 35 and 70, which is again kind of like in the human range. What is the f-stop that they have used?
It's a little hard to say with the resolution that's coming through here, but I would say like at least an f8. Like they haven't really thrown a lot of things out of focus, but it could, the image that's coming through is not quite in focus, so I'm not really sure.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think it's a pretty deep depth of field. So they're using something probably 8 or possibly even above, maybe 11 or something like that. And normally, if you had something that was at f11 or f8, it would be very kind of cluttered, where the background you wouldn't know what to look at because there's just so much going on, right? Which is kind of like what was going on over here in like this one, right? There's a ton of stuff that's going on here. There's clutter, but you also, this is just a painting. And in a painting, you have time to move your eye across everything. Whereas if you're in something like this, you don't have as much time to look over everything. But how have they managed to separate the subjects from the background then?
Their costumes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their costumes. And look at the brightness that you're seeing in this frame here. They're much brighter than anything else in the background. Even the ground is, I guess, a little kind of bright. She is kind of in her own pedestal because of the red dress. And he's in blue. So we have reds, blues, and these background colors, gray on the floor, green in the background. But the brightness is what's giving us separation. Any other thoughts about the location where they chose to do this show, this tension? Like, why did they pick this location for this kind of like falling motion? Right, so we have something here which is a landscape. Here she's on grass, which is interesting, right? Like here she starts on grass, and we have that kind of vulnerability of like, okay, how much would it hurt? And we've already established that the camera is moving with her, and we are empathizing with her, and our vulnerability is also then with her. And then later, as this goes along, she's going to be moving up into this part over here. And then when she falls again, now we've built up her vulnerability, right? So we started off with like the scene begins and she's on concrete, but she's walked to a safer location. Now she's gone from a safer location to a more vulnerable location. And the lens that we've chosen and the kind of perspective in light of the environment is also increasing the tension. And it's also more stark what the separation is. Before we had greens, right? Where we had a green ground, it was a little bit safer. Now we've got a harder ground, grayer, and actually we're starting to think of him color-wise. You know, she's in red, her skin is red, the dress is red. He's matching more the ground, right? So he is blue. The concrete is kind of, it's not blue, it's gray, but he's closer to the concrete than she is in color. So
another guy has to come in dressed in green.
right, if they wanted to establish that. But this is interesting in terms of like vulnerability and using color to create the tension in the characters and also in your scene. Like, what is it that you want people to identify with? How are you going to establish vulnerability? How are you going to establish it in terms of layout, in terms of color, in terms of movement, both camera movement and subject movement? And then how are you going to get the audience to empathize with that vulnerability? Okay. Let's talk a little bit now about how to move with the camera and trying to emulate this kind of like human motion. The basics for any kind of movement when you're holding a camera yourself. If you strap it straight to you, right, you're going to get this look and it's going to be kind of shaky, which is very human, but possibly nauseating. So if you want to smooth that out, you're going to want to bend your knees, which is, I think, something almost all dancers have heard. So it's good all around. You're going to bend your knees. If you're holding the camera, let's say you're holding your cell phone, you bend your knees. You're going to keep your elbows in, because the further out, you have more potential shake because you have more degrees of freedom. As you pull your elbows in, now the shake has to be the core, right? So like if you're holding a stick far away from you, the tip of it shakes more than the part that's closest to you, just because of angle magnification kind of effect. So pulling things in. Now, if you're filming somebody, you're going to probably want to know where they're going to go so that you know what the range of motion is. If I'm filming a subject tilt this here a second, right? I'll bend my knees. If I'm filming a subject and they're way over here, I can only turn this much if my feet are here. So you want to prepare your feet and your hips so that you can have the rotation. I've turned my feet so I can pivot. So knowing the range of motion that you're going to need for a particular shot, you want to anticipate and be ready for. Also, if you want something to be organic, if you come to a sudden stop, right? If I move and then I like hit the wall, then it's going to be jittery and there's going to be a jerk, which could be very useful if you want to imply that something has stopped motion. But if you want to imply that something is smooth and working with the motion, then you'll want to be moving and slowing smoothly. And as we saw in the film a second ago, you know, when she slows down, the camera slows down. And we kind of move at her pace. There's also optical image stabilization, which is built into some cameras and camera lenses, which is a dynamic between the lens stabilizing and the sensor stabilizing. That will smooth things out. It's called OIS, optic image stabilization. Sometimes it's in camera, sometimes it's in the lens. If it's optical image stabilization, it's usually in the lens. They have, I forget the other term for the stabilization, which is like in the sensor stabilization, and they'll call it 3-axis or 4-axis image stabilization. Another thing to think about when you're filming people is you have your range of motion of where people are going to go, but if someone goes out of frame, like if I'm doing some sort of dance here and I just go here, you might be like, oh, I wish I had those fingertips in the shot, right? If you're just like for continuity. So, or just smoothness or quality of some sort. So give yourself a buffer on the outside of your frame of what you're filming. And then plan on cropping in from that as necessary by whatever, you know, it could just be a couple of inches, so that your camera motion, you anticipate the person's going to stop here. So if they go a little bit further, you still have that range. If you don't do that, you know, it's very easy for things to get beyond the borders of what you wanted. So give yourself a little buffer. A way to give yourself buffer, right, is, does anybody remember the pixel ratio for full HD? Not the pixel ratio, the actual pixel numbers.
444.
That is the, that's the colored
Like 1080?
recording, 1080, right. So when you are looking at, let me pull up a 1080 chart real quick. Where is it? No. Where's my numbers? There it is. There. So full HD, 1920 by 1080. Right, we see that where it says full HD. So Larissa just pointed out 1080. So when people say 1080p, they are referring to 1920 by 1080p. If you're going to give yourself a little bit of buffer, then, and you want your film's final distribution to be 1920 by 1080p, you probably want to record a little bit larger than 1920 by 1080p. And that way you can have a little bit of buffer on the space. So in the camera settings, if you look at, I don't know if any of you got the app, but within Filmic Pro, I'm going to pull it up here real fast. Change my ratio. Come here. I need to be able to open landscape. There we are. So So within Filmic or in your cell phone, you're going to have resolution. And over here, you have that 4K option. So this one can go down to, there's an HD version, 1080, it just says 1080p. I don't know if that's legible. But the next frame up there is 2K at 1152p. So that gives you 152 more pixels plus the other 20, so 172 more pixels, or you might want to record that at 3p, right? 3K, which is 18 by 36. And that way you'll have that border there. And then you shoot it at whatever, 3K. And then when you want to crop in, you can still get full resolution of 1920 by 1080, and that'll be even better resolution, and you'll have actually less noise because everything is smaller, and you can zoom that in. So that's a way of getting some border by shooting a slightly larger frame. Of course, that's going to come with more memory usage because you're literally recording more pixels. Now, the other thing, of course, is you want to practice your movement. Like any movement, like dance, etc. The more you practice, the more you move, the better you're going to be. You're going to get smoother, etc. And then you want to be working with the dancer to see, like, how is the dancer moving? How are you moving? How is the dancer moving? How are you moving? And you want that to become a kind of choreography. The more you practice that, the better you'll become. Now, we talked about pan, tilt, dollies. There's also a crane, which is any, mechanism that you have for raising the camera, and that mechanism might be your arm, right? You might have a tilt at the same time that you're raising your arm. Or you might attach it to an actual boom pole or something like that that's going to raise it up, or attach it to a gimbal. Now, I think the biggest thing that I was thinking about last evening is, what is it that makes a dance interesting? Again, it's kind of subjective, kind of.
Probably the movement.
Movement makes something interesting. Okay.
Yes, but also no. Moments of stillness can also be really interesting in juxtaposition with the movement. For me, it's what makes something interesting is how I attach emotionally to what I'm seeing on stage. Aesthetically pleasing movement is, to me, for example, Merce Cunningham, really lovely, and I appreciate it intellectually, but I don't attach to it emotionally. So I prefer watching dance and movement that I can attach to emotionally in some way.
Mm-hmm. Waiting for you, Claire.
I just think like dynamics in general, so both movement and non-movement. What captures my attention the most usually is musicality, like the use of the music, or I guess not use of the music. I don't usually like things in that kind of aesthetic, but some people do. Yeah, and I also am always super impressed by like elite athleticism, and that's also just my personal aesthetic preference, but I find that the most interesting.
Rika?
Sorry for the noise here. Yeah, but for the aesthetics, I find that it's the connections between each pose, per se, the movements themselves, and the skill of the dancer is shown and how well that connection is not Nate obvious.
So I was thinking about this a lot last night. And I'm wondering, and it's not like I have any insight per se here, I wonder if the same things that make a dance powerful are the same things that make a film powerful, or a film about dance powerful. And in my thoughts on this, dance that's powerful for me is dance that's novel, in that the transformations, the movements, the context, that they are original to my experience, and that they are moving in some way that I had not anticipated or expected. And that's just mine. Now there's some where I'm just like, I do expect it. If somebody jumps, I'm expecting them to fall. But I wonder about that in terms of film, in that the other thing is intention. When I see a dance with a lot of clear intention, which I think is kind of like a fuzzy word, like what is intention? How can you tell when there's intention? But I think it's still valid. And perhaps in my mind, kind of the most important aspect of any dance performance is that there is an intention behind the movement. And that it's not just a byproduct or a filler, but that somebody said, I have this intention and I have this intention, and I actually have even thought about the intention of getting from here to there. And I think that maybe those kinds of ways of thinking and that kind of intention also directly applies to film. So that a film that has intention in the camera motion, or intention with this stillness, has more power than, and more empathy and more connection for me than something that I perceive as not really intentioned, almost accidental. So I just thought that would be an interesting kind of connection between dance and cinema. As Rika was saying, connection. What is the connection between this motion? We in that peanut film, there was a very clear connection between the movement of the female dancer and the camera. So we had connection, and that was done with intention. So if we create a choreography, or we have a choreography, then I would argue that we can really want to have an intention behind your camera motion for that choreography. Like, what is the choreography about? And then consequently, what is the camera motion or lack of motion or style of motion about? Not just accidentally there, but intentionally there. One thing I was reviewing, well, anyway, what are people's thoughts about that?
That certainly keeps you from having one static camera view. Although, as a purist for Japanese classical dance, I like to just have the one shot, see the whole body. You can see the lines, and you can see where the position and the posture is moving towards. And, allows for the complete openness of the audience's perspective so that they can then follow. So having a choreographed camera motion that then essentially becomes another dancer because you're playing with the perspective of the audience. um, makes it quite complex in my mind. But
Yeah. Jenny, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think from a dance maker and dancer and dance perspective, I think it's okay to also not rule out the idea of improvisation. I think that can be also really powerful. And even though it might not have been strategically choreographed and planned out from what is movement and point one to movement and point B, or the final end of the phrase, some really interesting, beautiful things can happen in improvisation. And I think that can also happen in filming. And I have for sure, I think I probably said this since starting with the first workshop that I did, but like having some direction and specificity and plan in what you're doing, as well as allowing for flexibility in space and improvisation. I know that a lot of the films I have made, it's been just being behind the camera and following what seems interesting to me in that moment. And there's also been like, this is the specific choreographed shot that I'm going to film for this. So I think having, and in, thinking was listening to what you guys were talking about what's interesting to you in dance. And I think that, it's different for every person, also depending on what your background is and what you've been used to seeing, right? But I think, and that's, like what you were hitting on, that there's this similarity between filmmaking and dance making, or dance and film, which I totally agree with, is this like embodiment, kind of what I was talking about the elements of dance. We're dealing with time and space and body and dynamics or qualities, and those things can all be present in both. So I think it's a bit of a ramble, but I think that, I think for me, it's a balance of improvisation and set choreography, but for sure having intention behind it. I think you're absolutely right about that, Enki, that having some intention behind what it is you're doing or what you're trying to say, and sticking to that and having that be a through line through the work is really powerful.
So do you think, well, and I asked this for all the dancers there, when you are creating movement, what is your process?
I think that can vary per person and vary per project and per moment. There's been, speaking personally, there's been pieces I've created where I've turned on music that wasn't even going to be the music in the piece, and I just improvised to how that music made me feel, where I was at that day, filmed it, went back, just, set up a camera, filmed myself improvising, filmed it, watched what I found to be interesting or something that I wanted to make as a part of the piece, and then recreated that and learned what my improvisation was. There's been other times where, like the work that my partner Lauren and I were making, super specific, to the nth degree, what way are you looking? What's the angle of your head? How much weight is shifted into this foot? How do we get to this next move that we've previously made and find that transition? So I think it's such a open-ended answer. My assumption is per person, per piece, per situation, which is not helpful.
The people I've spoken to and the dancers that I know, I feel like the process I've seen or heard is that they create some sort of practice, right, or process, and they fool in that space. And then they end up extracting certain elements that they're like, that worked, that didn't work, that didn't work, that works, that works, I like that, I might come back to that. And they kind of collect over time pieces, and then they start kind of like assembling, refining, connecting, maybe throwing some things out, bringing things back in, shifting things, which is kind of interesting and kind of can relate to an editing process as well. But I wonder if that's back to this kind of like intention and process for filming. You might want to do the same thing. You might want to say, I'm going to play here. I'm going to give myself some limitations, right? I'm going to be in this space. I'm going to shoot this way, blah, blah, blah. But then I'm going to extract certain little bits. I'm like, that worked, that worked, that works. And then I'm going to go back and see if I can integrate it again. And then can I smooth that out? Is it kind of working? Okay, no, that's not working. Throw that away, start over. But I think that there's a practice of, at least in some of the people I've spoken with, is that you try something and then you try it again and you try it again and you kind of work with it. So there's both intention in the movement, there's the play zone, and then you kind of go back and refine. And I think like that is a potential practice with filming. It's unlikely that you're going to say, I know exactly how I'm going to move the camera. It's going to go this way. It's going to move this much. We're going to go here. And that will be correct. And that's the best I can possibly do. Right? That unlikely to happen. So I think what happens is we see a choreography that we kind of like, and then we say, let me try this. I have an intention. Is it working? And then you refine that, and then you throw it out, or you keep it, or you improve it, or you say, no, you know what, it'd be better over here to get that. So I'm just curious, and I'm suggesting for people to play, give yourself the room to play with what you're filming, and don't lock yourself into like, I've picked these restrictions, I have to stick with them. Or this is my process and I have to, whatever, I'm going to definitely film it this way. It's a back and forth with the same kind of thing. But then as you refine it, you can end up possibly with like, if I have this intention when I'm moving the camera or when I'm filming, it will keep me on course. And it's just kind of like a heading, like a compass. You're not saying you're never going to deviate, but you might have this intention that you're like, that just keeps your compass in that direction. But you can weave your way through there to get to your end. Just my thoughts on last night when I was thinking about working with, and I'm now excited to like work on another dance project, to be like, what if I do that? What if I really like just say I'm gonna keep the light over there and I'm only gonna shoot this way. Oh, I forgot to mention something. There's what I said, tilt, pan. There's also this thing called the Dutch or the French angle, which is when you just tilt the camera sideways. And that's a Dutch-French angle. Some people use that to show tension. You'll see that in a fair number of films when somebody is kind of disoriented and now the camera is like skewed this way and the perspective has shifted. And they are no longer kind of balanced on a rectilinear up and down thing, but things are skewed. It's a type of disorientation, which I think in dance, it has a lot of potential, because I almost feel like dancers are always exploring these kind of orientations, right? A dance that is straight up and down or flat horizontal, probably not as interesting as something that's got different perspectives. So thinking on those lines, how might your camera motion facilitate that? Okay, so that has, we've I guess, let me back up here for a second. Big picture perspective, should the camera move at all? And if so, why?
Well, I'll start. If the camera doesn't move, it's a different type of film or video. So they're maybe more straightforward documentary, like maybe you just want to live stream something and it's just you set a camera up and it has its purpose. It's not involving the camera as maybe as much as you would if the camera moves. It's not sort of active participant. It's just sort of capturing something, maybe for longevity's sake, or just for the dancers to evaluate the performance.
Mhm. Anybody else?
I feel like this is a trick question, but I say yes, because unless you were purposely, trying to just have a fixed camera to focus on, one thing, like Larissa was saying, etc., it could get boring to me personally.
I think that moving the camera, you can reveal and conceal things that you're not normally going to see from that static perspective. From a viewer's standpoint, like as like someone who watches a lot of dance film for grants and other like panels, like I don't want to see a single steady shot. That's boring. I'm gonna like fast forward and end it within 5 or 10 seconds of watching it. Like it doesn't, a static camera doesn't, for the whole thing, doesn't add anything to the performance. It's literally just documentation. And I don't find it interesting or appealing to watch something like that. And I think it's a lot of I don't know, it does a disservice to the work that you're creating as a dancer, for my feeling, if you're not going to use like the camera to the fullest extent to reveal or conceal something new or different. I think we're also so in love at times with like this live feeling of performance that I think we've talked about this before, where like a lot of people think that by watching dance on film or dance on camera, we lose that live element. But I think by using camera motion to the fullest extent that you can, it adds back in that element of connection that we get live. And dance for camera is a very different purpose than dance on stage. There is need and want for both, but why would you present dance on camera exactly the same way as you would present dance on stage? We're not getting any new information, so just present it on stage if we're just going to have a static camera. That's my feeling.
So in comparing a static camera shooting something, and is there a difference between a static camera recording something full frame, everything is in frame, centered, and being in a studio seated in the audience and watching? And then what is the difference?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Is there an experiential difference between looking at a stage production from a recording that was placed in a seat, looking at the entire stage, and sitting in that seat yourself and watching the performance?
Of course there is.
Why?
You're not smelling the environment. You're not experiencing being in the space. You're not feeling the air move around you. You have no choice once you've decided to be in that space. Where if you're gonna flick on a movie, you can be on your sofa or in the living room, especially now, right? You could be practically anywhere and watch it. So that's already removing you from that focus or that mentality of the environment of being within the dance, is my humble opinion.
You said
People
within the
also-
dance.
Oh.
You said within the dance? Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by in the dance?
I suppose you're limited by your vision and all the other senses that you're going to use to propel yourself into that performance. I mean, I was just thinking one dancer right now, but if it's a production, we're not even talking about a set. So yeah, I think it's how much of the 360 around you are you going to let yourself be in?
I mean, it's still creating that fourth wall, either through the screen frame or sitting in the seat. But with live, you know, your eye is really the camera, so you direct your vision of where you want to look and what you can attach to. Because I don't know that we normally like watch a dance film and see everything. Your eye is attracted to different parts of the movement depending on, you know, who is pushing or pulling focus in the moment. So with a steady camera, with just like one shot camera, you're sort of seeing everything. Whereas like if, yeah, it's kind of the same to me, a steady camera in a seat and sitting in an audience, but there's like one extra layer between you and what you're seeing.
So I some things that I keyed up for me that triggered some things were the words immersion. When you are, and I think it was Rika was saying that when you're at the performance, you are in the space, and in that sense, you are immersed in the space, which has, from a word origin standpoint, you know, you are encompassed, right? Or you've been encompassed by the space. Surinder, you mentioned the fourth wall. So when you're watching something on a screen, the fourth wall exists. Literally the screen. But when you're on stage, when you're at the studio, you are, there isn't a fourth wall, unless, well, there might be a fourth wall, but you have a proximity, a literal proximity to the performer. So the fourth wall is thinner, perhaps, is a way of expressing it. And all that makes me think about vulnerability. What would you say is the vulnerability one has from looking at a film from here that's pre-recorded versus being in the space? I think it's obvious that we're much more vulnerable in the space, immersed in it, than we are looking at things from here, right? So I think vulnerability is the big difference between a recorded film and being actually in the place where the performance is occurring. If that's the case, and let me raise your hands if you think vulnerability is one of the key differences there. Okay, so now then, if vulnerability is kind of, if we're trying to get to a kind of a reality and we're trying to reach people and we're trying to affect people, then we should be thinking about vulnerability and how to facilitate that sense of vulnerability. So I have this idea that, and I got this from an improv class. I took an improv class because I'm in Chicago, of course. So you take an improv class. Who else has taken an improv class? 1, 2, Rika, did you? Surinder is an improviser, no question.
I mean, I took improv classes in college. I used to teach improv classes.
Oh, there you go. All right, fine. So the thing that I really took away from an improv class was that it's all about relationships. And that anytime we had a scene, I had to go with what was the relationship that was being established by whatever somebody said, right? The yes and. And when you have a choreography in many ways, you're back into a yes and situation with the choreography. And your camera now is in a yes and consequently you have this relationship with the subject. So, and to tie this in a little bit, when you've got a static camera that is outside of the shot and it's just film, it's locked down, it's sitting in a seat on a tripod, and you're looking at the whole scene, you can argue that it's an objective perspective because you're kind of outside, you're not in it, and being outside, we associate that with being objective, versus some sort of camera that is like in your face, and you are now a bit more subjective, right? So objectivity is kind of like locked down. You know, it could be a process or a setup, but objectivity is this. You get the frame here, it's locked, and that's kind of an objective point of view. Versus when the camera starts to move, then it becomes more subjective. And that relationship is what is being emphasized in your camera placement and motion. So if camera perspective and motion is about relationships, do we as filmmakers have a filmic contract with the audience?
Meaning what?
Well,
Like a responsibility to them?
well, that's the question. It's like, yeah, what I mean by that is an analogous to the social contract, right? Where the social contract is some sort of like, I'll look it up for precision. The social contract, an implicit agreement amongst members of society to cooperate for social benefits, for example, by sacrificing some individual freedom for state protection. John Locke, Rousseau, Hobbes, blah, 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 as a means of explaining the origins of government and the obligation of the subjects, and perhaps the obligation of the government.
As a filmmaker, we have an obligation to entertain, maybe?
Entertain, okay.
I kind of think if you're going to bring in a filmmaker, why just do a straightforward documentary? It's not adding anything. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to if you want to create a dance video or bring in a filmmaker to do something, it should be adding something to the equation. Otherwise, why are you doing it? A little bit, kind of, why are you doing it? And this isn't the greatest parallel maybe, but, and I'm not a big sports fan, but you know how if you follow sports, like they have a football game or something, you could have a ticket and be there. And it's definitely the people that follow that find it thrilling. But on the other hand, they have all those cameras and commentary that if you stay at home and tune into it, it is a completely different experience, because maybe you're trying to make up for that, the flat walls or fourth wall syndrome of the screen, but you've now created something that, well, wait a second, I may actually prefer that version instead of going to the real thing, because they've added so much now. And so taking that sports parallel into dance, I think you need to be adding something.
Actually, that's an analogy that I've used a lot recently. That there with the sports and dance. I'm not a sports person anymore. But yeah, they do that really, really well. That there are people that go see sports live because that is their thing. And then there are people that go see, or, you know, see it virtually because that is their thing. Yes, there's some crossover, but those two audiences experience the same thing really differently because that's what they're interested in. And I feel like, yeah, how do we do that for a dance? How do we make that interesting? Not only to make it interesting for the audience, but to build audiences. We had our See Chicago Dance Gala the other night, and Frank and I produced both a in-person live performance and a whole separate virtual performance that were completely different experientially, because we wanted that connection for the virtual people to be interesting and not just have like the static thing that you're passively watching, but to have interaction. So I think that's like what you're getting at.
Yeah. And audience building is a big thing with me. I absolutely love what you guys are talking about. But one of the things that we haven't touched on yet with audience building is as creators, as filmmakers, as dancers, or whatever art, one of the things we have to remember is that we are making this for the audience. I think too often as artists, we get into our own heads of what we want to produce without thinking about what is the audience going to want from us. So that's just another perspective. You know, there's a whole bunch of, you can do research before you do, you know, a certain choreography or something like that, and seeing how people responded in live and perhaps what they might want to see digitally through film. But that's just another thing too to think about is, you know, don't, and this comes back to just don't make art for art's sake. You know, what way could we tell this story that we know that perhaps the same audience that saw it live can experience it in a new way, that could really, really enjoy it in a different way because of what we're doing. Because remember, we're making this for the audience. Don't forget that. Audience is key.
I love this. I love this point, Frank. I love this point. I love this point. And I wish to emphasize it brutally. Can I do this? I can. So to the question, do we have a relationship with the audience? And I think we can say we have some sort of relationship to the audience. To this question then, back to what Frank was saying, is like, are we doing something for the audience? And if so, if we're doing something for the audience, in what way are we doing it? I would like to suggest that, here's a question. Does the moving camera exhibit power? I'm going to keep doing this until I hear a response.
Yes.
I was too interested in watching.
Yeah.
Yes. I think I just instantly got engaged because, yeah, when we're just talking to you, we're seeing your face or what you want to show us with like switching, and now we're seeing everything that you're seeing, and that's really engaging and interesting because it's like that behind the scenes view. And so I didn't want to say anything because I was just interested in wanting to know what you're going to show us next.
Right. So so if a moving camera or a camera, any camera, right? I have certain power here, but eventually, you know, you could just get really bored if I stick here. If I stay on the shot, how long until you're bored? So if a moving camera exhibits power, then the film director, the camera operator, has the power in that situation until you shut off the screen. So one question I have is, can that power, whenever there's power, can that power be abused? Yes or no?
Like what we were talking about with the Blair Witch Project, and I'm going to Upchuck right now.
Right. So
that's the use of power.
Right. So if we have a power relationship and we have the capacity to abuse that power, then we also have an issue of trust. Right? So power can be abused, power can be facilitated, it can be indifferent, right? We have all these different relationships with power. So I think I'm proposing that video, is an example of a degree of emotional relationship. And that it's all about relationships, like improv. How you feel about the subject and how the camera operator feels about the subject informs the camera motion and the audience of how you would like them to feel. So you as a director then have to ask, am I aware of my own behavior with the camera? Do I have self-awareness behind the camera? What am I communicating? How am I involved? And what do my different camera motions convey? Now, to Frank's point, do I have empathy for the audience? Or am I like a child where I'm saying, this is interesting to me. Look, 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 look. I just want you to see this. This is important, right? So it might not be interesting to the audience. It might just be like, okay, great, you're a crazy person, or you're a bad camera operator, or I've lost trust in you to provide me with either an objective perspective, right? Or a subjective perspective. So I want to lead this into the project today. If camera is about power and relationships, then I want to think about the camera as power and relationships. And I want to explore that. So we're going to start the project, which is going to be, I want you to pick 3 emotions. You're going to have to pick your 3 emotions ahead of time. So write it down now.
Did you say emotions?
Emotions, emotional. Pick 3 emotions, and I want you to film as best you can something or some things 3 times in a way that conveys each of those 3 emotions. Using every technique in your toolbox. So 3 emotions, 3 camera motions. And this is kind of a tough one, but I think it's very important, particularly because this Saturday, we're going to have the project. And then we're going to have to have a choreographer. We're going to have multiple camera operators, and we're going to have to try to convey the emotion that we want the audience to receive. So today's practice, 3 emotions, and then how are you going to film that and how are you going to convey that? Now we have some time constraints, of course, but don't forget all the elements that you have at your disposal, right? You have the camera itself. You have the lighting, right? You have the camera motion. You have the camera perspective. You also have sound. So it might be a lot to put in. We have 20 minutes left. Who here, raise your hand if you cannot stay past noon. If you cannot stay past noon, raise your hand. Okay, good. All right, so everybody can stay a little bit past noon. Let's do this. What do you guys think is 20 minutes? Is that enough? 5 minutes to prepare everything, and then 5 minutes per emotion. And then we'll come back in 20 minutes at noon and review and see how we have. Let's keep the thing small. So let's say maximum 15 seconds per emotion.
Well, while we're uploading, Claire, Larissa, Rika, were you all planning on joining us on Saturday in person?
Yes, I was going to ask, like, obviously I'm gonna bring my camera, but is there anything else like I need to bring or like be prepared for? And a snack, many snacks. I will bring many snacks.
Yeah, I'll have some snacky snacks. So bring your lunch. I'll have some water and some other snacks, but bring your lunch. We'll eat together. You know, camera, if you want your tripod, just like anything that you really want to play with. Like wear layers, since we can also go outside. Who knows what the weather is going to be like, but so you don't have to bring too much, but if there's something that you want to play with, please bring it. Larissa, I didn't find out about the drone yet, so bring it with you, because there's certainly sidewalk you can launch from. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. They didn't answer my question about permission, so.
Yeah, so I'd say everybody bring a camera. If you have a DSLR, then, or it's mirrorless, I would bring that. And also, like I think Claire, you mentioned you had a long lens. Did you get a chance to look at the photos that were posted? I'm not even sure where they were posted. Did they get posted for the location we're going to?
I'm doing that after we're done today.
Okay, so
Send them out in the email.
okay, so they're there. Anyway, I think there's some opportunities for a long lens. So I would bring that as well. I'm going to bring a DSLR and my cell phone. And also, I would say bring a tripod, because what I'm thinking is that we might have like one performer and we might have multiple people shooting, and we might want to see what different perspectives are like. So bring your own tripod, since people will be probably having different perspectives. Yeah, so just camera and tripod. Also, if somebody's thinking about maybe being in the performance, look at the pictures which we posted today and think about what kind of color of clothing would work for that space. So thinking about something that might separate the subject from the background. I think there's a lot of wood there, so I'll be wearing probably blue as a something to extract myself a little bit from the background. But just take a look, and I'm not saying that blue is the right thing to wear or the only thing to wear at all. It's just a choice I'm making. But think about what colors you would want to be if you had something that you're going to be in the frame, or you're going to be background, or you're going to be possibly there, because color can be a good element there. And
Where did you say the location is? I was looking for a link in Discord, but I'm not seeing it.
Location is Burger Park Cultural Center.
Oh, okay. I thought you changed it or something. Okay.
yeah.
No, for this one, it'll be Burger Park, where still trying to sort out for the 6th. It might be at the Sculptural Park here in Skokie, which is also close to my house, or it could be Indian Boundary Park, depending on weather a little bit, but I'm still trying to confirm with Park District.
And on this Saturday, it's at noon?
11. We're going to start at 11 a.m. just so we can finish a little earlier, because the park closes earlier than we're done. Hopefully we'll be done a little earlier, depending on.
Yeah, it's Halloween.
Yeah. And then in terms of getting there, I can everybody, I'm posting the link here in, I'll add it to workshop 7. Here's the, and then there's a, all right, so I've added the link there in workshop 7, the location and address. Good parking is actually across the street. What's the name of that street, Surinder, that comes there?
I think that's Granville is usually like parking on that street.
Yeah, so
Like Metropolis Coffee, since it's kind of like Broadway, which doesn't really have parking, and there's a little bit of construction.
okay. Yeah.
There's also a garage. So I work at, there's an Orange Theory there and an Aldi like under that garage, and they're building an animal hospital in there. That garage is like technically free. If you like go up the ramp, and like the first level above the ground is for Aldi parking, but they don't check that. I know from experience.
Okay.
I didn't know that. Looks like links are in, so why don't we have a looky look?
Okay. Great.
Cool. We'll start with Surinder.
Mhm.
Everybody see this? Hold on, let me just double check, make sure I.
I'm back to Zoom. For a second, I saw your screen.
Carried away this feeling I know, just talking to myself again, up and down the waves, knee deep in cold, hear the aspen's heavy sound.
I worked out how to do music.
Yay! Excellent. Great success. All right, and well, since there's 3, why don't we talk a little bit, well, since we just saw that, why don't we talk a little bit about each of your emotions? So any guesses by anybody besides Surinder about what was the first emotion?
Relaxed.
I was saying it looked like she felt relaxed. I felt like the camera motion was like kind of behind the head of this other person. Initially, I thought it was a person. I was like, how did she's lying down with, is that her husband? Who is in the bed? And I was like, oh. And then I was like, okay, that's intimate feeling. And I felt like the camera was moving kind of smoothly. So I had an intimate kind of like relaxed, sleepy feel. But also I felt it was a little like voyeuristic, coming in just from over the head, which I know, of course, if you're filming yourself, it's hard to be further away from the camera than your arm can reach. But that is something to just think about. It's like, how does camera distance affect emotion, or whatever emotion you're trying to convey, the limitations of that, and explore it and learn from there. Anybody, any other thoughts? No. So describe the second scene. I forgot it already.
It was just me, no other person. So you saw the blank space next to me on the pillow.
Yeah. As you describe it, I think of it as loneliness, but I'm almost like projecting on everything else I know about loneliness in film to be like, maybe she was going this way. But again, hard to do when you're there, if that's in fact what it was. Any other thoughts?
I wanted to see if I could make the camera movement sort of the same as the first one and just show that there was that person was gone.
I was gonna say I liked that the camera moved the same way between the first and second shot, and that also that the song was the same, because I noticed, yeah, the person was gone and it felt lonely. And sorry, I'm not like trying to project like my feelings onto it. Felt lonely in the second shot versus the first one, but it gave like a sense of like melancholy almost, because the song was still like.
But I think like I think the irony is that we have to project. There's no way to be like, oh, this is what this means, right? We are not objective, and it's a subjective medium, and it's the film itself is relying on us to be a subjective audience and to be capable of being suggestible. So I think we have to lean into that. And then also when you're filming, sorry, I'm putting on socks because my feet got cold. When you're filming you film something, you have to be able to switch roles to be like, okay, this was my intention when I filmed, and now I have to switch over into viewer mode and being like, how is it actually making me feel? Not how do I want it to make me feel. Right? You have to try to shift yourself over and be like, okay, how do I become subjective about this, and no longer the subject of my own prior intentions, but a new, raw, subjective, unbiased, or perhaps slightly biased person. That's a real challenge, I find, at least for myself, is that, can I see this really objectively? Because I'm like, I was going this way, therefore that's where it is. Like, not for anybody but you. But that's I think a very important thing to discover about yourself. And that's more like in the editor role of how to be a good editor, and pushing yourself into those subjective spaces. All right. Nick, was that all three? Did we cover all three of yours?
No, the third one was where we revealed my person wasn't a person.
The reveal. Thoughts on what that emotion was?
Deception, maybe.
I think it comes across as creepy, which is not exactly sort of what I intended, but not really. I mean, I was sort of like, how do I do sort of like a blank slate of just like nothingness? I don't know. Maybe it should have just been, I don't know.
I think that I feel like I felt kind of creeped. I found it was a bit creepy. So anybody else? Rika, is that a yes? Yeah, she is also thinking creepy. So I think we can learn from that and be like, that's how you do creepy, or that's one way to do creepy. And then it's good to like review that and watch it again and be like, okay, why is this creepy? So that you can imitate it later if you ever need creepy again. Or be like, don't do that because it won't come off the way you intended. It comes off as creepy. So learning from mistakes, I think, is the best. All right, next film. Yay, co-stars. Co-stars. What's the name of the dog again?
Her name's Onyx.
Onyx. All right, any emotions there for anybody?
I mean, the first one was definitely suspenseful with the music, and then just kind of like the really up close jerkiness of it. And then the last two, I think, you know, both loving, but one was like more playful, and then the second one was more calm.
Yeah, I feel like you're, as you said before, that you're really driven by music. So it's great that you managed to put that in there. And yes, the music told me that this was scary, but being a dog person, I was like, oh, cute puppy. So how might you make that more apprehensive? Was it supposed to be like scary-ish? Yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be scary. It's a little hard when your subject isn't all that scary. Or well trained. I was trying to get her to like go slow and then go fast to chase me. She's 4 months old, so shockingly she didn't do that.
So what else could you have done if you'd had time, you know, and to make what you shot a little scarier?
I mean, I think lighting, either the color of light or like just the darkness.
Yeah. So, lighting.
And parts of the dog versus all the cuteness of him.
Yeah, maybe like close-ups of something, the teeth,
Eyes.
the eyes. What Cernu was saying, the lighting. Also, you could have also, you know, of course we were all rushing, so of course it's for fun. But also frame rate. Like we're going for a jittery kind of thing. If something's kind of smooth can be scary if it's a kind of clinical robotic kind of smoothness. But also scary can be if it's jerky, and then emphasizing that jerky could be a frame rate, which is like almost like a mashed up 12 frames a second, where it's slow, and then fast, and things are happening, you know, before you can anticipate them, a jerky kind of film frame rate. And then of course having a terrifying 4-month-old puppy. So, but then maybe another possibility there is perspective. The camera angle that you're at, like, or you're above the puppy versus below the puppy. Sorry, below the killer puppy. So where you are there. Okay, and then the next thing you shot, any thoughts on that emotion? So that was also, there was still camera motion in that one, is that correct? Am I remembering the right sequence?
No, well, if there definitely was not supposed to be, because
Okay.
it was on my trash can.
Oh, it was on the trash can, sorry. So the perspective was a little bit lower, and the music I'm already forgetting. Plank, can you replay the last two again? laughing at Rika's comment. Yes, all puppies all day. Yeah, so trash can. So I don't have a insight. Is anybody else?
Seemed like joy, you know.
Contentment.
Yeah, content was the aim
Okay.
for the second one.
And then the final one, in my head, I started thinking about power and perspective. So I don't know if you were going there, but music wasn't.
I was trying to go for like tired, hence her like laying down and getting like a view in, because behind where the camera was is a window. So it's like I wanted it to be like you're peering in to my house, you know, at night, and I'm like trying to calm my dog down and, you know, wind down.
Yeah, so I think this also, you did a great job with the music. And then if we had time, the other thing that, you know, filmmakers use all the time to kind of severe effect is lighting and tone of lighting. There's a lot of shots that people will use and they want to set something in the evening and they will just literally tint it to blue and be like, this is moonlight, everything is blue, things are absurdly blue, therefore it's nighttime, even though it's still bright. So those are things to play with, tone, you know, your color space tone that's there for that effect. And then also like how local is the lighting, you know, like right now we have kind of like brighter lighting. Surinder is probably like the most obviously lit, or Frank, where, you know, it's probably daylight, we can see a background. And so the tone is kind of happier, and thank you. We have a daylight tone that's there. Larissa is mysterious, always, oh, it's always sunny in the woods. And then indoors is unclear whether it's daytime or nighttime, but color space makes a big sense there. And also, you know, tired as an emotion, that's interesting. How to have tired camera, either perspective or motion or both. I guess, you know, sometimes you see something when somebody is filming somebody who's been sedated and they're like struggling to stay conscious and they're trying to keep their eyes open, and you'll see a switch in perspective and you'll see like eyelids coming down on the shot, and this frame is kind of like going out of frame because, you know, they're just so tired. So who you want to empathize with and what is their perspective and what are they experiencing? That's something. And then, okay. Any other, is there another video there, Frank? All right, any emotional interpretations from the gallery?
I have lots. I think it's the combination of the music and the subject matter that is very sexual, and different types of sexual, because you've got the like Robert Mapplethorpe images that he used as kind of like I'm sure you probably all know Mapplethorpe and his photography. And then who was the visual artist? Blanking on her name, woman, Georgia O'Keeffe, and her work as well, which were both Mapplethorpe was more of a male, gay, and Georgia was much more female oriented. So it's like the juxtaposition of the two, but then like, yeah, the different like, you know, aspects of sexuality a little bit. That's what I saw in the three.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very insightful and important aspect of that is like, yes, there's the sexual associations we might have with that. I'm not sure about musically if that has the same, visually I got that impression, but I wasn't sure.
I got it musically was Indian Kama Sutra, because I'd already, as soon as I saw the image, it was like Mapplethorpe and Georgia O'Keeffe, and then the music was like Indian Kama Sutra reference for me.
Okay. Rika, was that also, were you thinking in that direction? Yes?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Great. Yeah, so what I was going to say was, in addition to that, is thinking about where the audience is also preconditioned or pre-associated. So, you know, depending on your audience, are they familiar with Georgia O'Keeffe? Have they seen those flower paintings, Mapplethorpe, etc.? And that while you want to make things clear to the audience, you don't want to insult the audience or like, you know, on the nose of something for the audience of just like, this is a phallic, I have to use a penis or something like that, right? Or like over and over emphasize, is take into consideration your audience and what context that they're coming in. And you can be subtle and you get to feel out that degree. But I think it's nice that, you know, there was an assumed association for this audience already. So I think that worked out really well. Any other thoughts? Now the second film, the second section was more it was more like, is that the one that caressed, or was that the shaky version?
It was shaky.
It was shaky. Okay. So what did anybody think about what that might have meant? I took it to be kind of uncertain and disturbed in a way, because the subject seemed to be physically disturbed, and I saw like a kind of violence.
My emotion that I wrote down was agitated.
Yeah. Rika, where were you heading there?
I found I was more influenced by the music, so I was just going between the extremes of more of like this jaunty, you know, and an energizing thing. And then I can't actually remember what there was a third part to the music, so I feel like the track is gone, so I'm not sure.
Okay. But what emotion were you going for?
Expansion.
Rika, what emotion were you going for? Did you say expansion?
Oh, on my project?
That one was Larissa's project. We haven't seen Rika's yet.
Yeah.
Oh, all this time. I'm sorry, Larissa. I thought it was Rika that had the flower. I don't know why. In my head.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. So agitation. Yeah, that makes sense. And then what else do you think could have been done to make it more agitating?
Oh, there could be, I did add a little bit of light on that one, but it's not very noticeable. Maybe move the camera more. And I don't know, played around with some maybe stop features or something.
It's interesting to think about how to empathize with the plant. And that if the plant is the subject, then how do we empathize with the plant? How do we have a plant's perspective? Maybe a possibility is switching the view from the top down to more of a bottom up.
If we came from stem, so then we saw like, yeah, the opposite direction. Or like through the foliage.
Good ideas.
And it's also like the sense of the time scale that plants kind of function at, and the fact that they are fixed. You know, this is of course much longer, but a perspective could be a time lapse where you're seeing, you know, days and days pass, and the clouds are going by because they are so static that they have to stay there, and they are fixed to that one perspective. And the time scale is something. We have our own rhythms for time, but if you shift the speed with which time is passing, then you get out of this human scale of time,
right?
Or the velocity of time, which of course we didn't have time for in the 15 minutes. But it is something to think about, of how to use time to get people into the mindset of some other subject. And okay, any other thoughts? All right, we should get to the last one then.
Rika, you're at Northeastern right now? It's like, I recognize that blue. Now there's one more too, so let's watch that one as well. Escape. There we go.
I couldn't find any of the right sounds. And I obviously could not do any camera motion things without moving it myself. And I am in the Commons area at Northeastern, so a little limited.
Yeah, I thought it was nice. Any thoughts on the emotions that she was conveying?
Well, I thought the first one was very like suspenseful and creepy and sort of like anxiously waiting. And the second one was more like playful waiting for me.
Yeah. Can I just jump to it? Yeah, I was basically going for calm on the first one, but all I could find were like raindrops or waterfalls. And it's like, I'm in the commons, there doesn't match. And then so it turned into that weird suspenseful thing. And then the second one was supposed to be more agitated, right? But again, I couldn't find the right thing. I ended up with this weird jazz thing. So I was like, hey, I'm a little nervous. Oh, I'm waiting. Yeah. So, and then I couldn't do the third one, which was going to be sleep, right? So it was going to be kind of problematic.
I just sort of imagine like for the third one, like since the shots were fairly similar and what you were like your hands and whatever. So like for sleep, yeah, what is the movement that you do? And maybe it's all driven by the sound or just, like slowing down, doing exactly the same movements like you were for both of them. And just like, slowing it down, either like how you're filming it or just, because you're doing the movements slower. You probably have enough footage already that you can just slow it down and then add the music and then like that's sleep.
Yeah, I think it's interesting amongst everybody how powerful music was. I think it's clearly known by the attendees here how important music is to anything and how much it overrides whatever your intention is, or if it's in conflict, then it can get to an impasse. And how important lighting is, right? So Rika, she's trapped at Northeastern right now, and that really constrains the emotional feel of something. She can try to override it with music, but then it's like, does the setting actually complement the music, and does the subject or what is filmed, really do it, even if it's in the foreground and it's evidenced, how does setting affect the emotional scape and perspective that the audience is in? And so if you have competing factors, there's kind of like you get up in a deadlock situation where there's no emotional place that you can get to. So thinking about how important it is to get a location set for your particular intention. And is it really going to work? So music is great to get you there. But if you set up everything else, if you set up your motion, if you set up your perspective, you have your location, your setting, and your lighting, and your color space, then music can be this coup de grace, effectively, where you've set up everything else, and then the music is just this avalanche that nobody emotionally can really resist. But that's when planning makes a huge part of whatever it is. And I'm thinking here that we're running certainly well past time, but I wanted to leave with a homework project for people to play with if they wanted to, as a matter of practice, which is, we've talked about emotions, doing 3 emotions. I thought also doing something about 3 relationships in film, if you're so inclined to think about a relationship in the film context, and then how would you convey that? And then which lens, what kind of motion, what kind of texture can you use to convey relationship, which is an integration of emotion also then with the subject, and to kind of like explore those 2 things. And so I can post that in the chat here real quick. But think about that if you like, and that's kind of a fun project. And then for this coming Saturday, we have our in-person class. So I hope everybody's excited about that. I know I am. And I think everybody was here. Bring your camera, bring your tripod. If there's a toy you want to play with, please do. I also recommend that people bring their laptop. I'm hoping that we're going to get to do a little mini edit going so we can kind of see what we can assemble. And also, if you have any questions about you know, your editing space, you can either show people how to do something, maybe somebody's interested in Resolve, or I can show people some things on Final Cut if people are interested in that, or iMovie, and take a look at the pictures of the location. Does everybody have transportation and they're all good to get there? Yeah. Okay. And thank you everybody for staying so much longer than I had planned. I really appreciate it. I hope you got something out of it. Anything else? Any final thoughts?
I'm sorry, can you repeat or confirm that we're meeting earlier than for Saturday? It is
11 a.m.
11 a.m.
11. Okay. And was there a particular spot?
Come into the Burger Park Cultural Center, that main building, and we're in the first floor. So we've basically taken over that whole first floor of that building.
Okay.
And we'll have a special Rachel who does a lot of film work, and Rachel's going to be the mentor with us, and also another body to kind of move through space. Bring your lunch. I'll have snacks together. It's going to be just a fun day. Off topic just slightly, just breaking news. If anyone would like to see Akram Khan at November 13 or 13 and 14, whatever that Friday, Saturday is, I have a discount code that I can email you all to purchase those tickets. Just thought I would offer an industry code if you would like to go see Akram, because that performance is going to be great. So excited.
Yes.
Actually, I'll just pop it, and I think it's $30 tickets. Those tickets are actually pretty expensive, so that is for you. Other than that, thank you everyone. I really enjoyed our discussion today. As always, I really enjoyed how our mini projects have progressed. I know I'm learning lots, and we'll see you all 11 a.m. Saturday.